Okay, so today is going to be the first step towards character animation with kind of minimal effort for developing a character without having to actually fully model a character and fully create a rig from scratch. We're going to get this to a place where we can animate and do a walk cycle and eventually a run cycle and maybe an idle cycle and then a short scene. So for today, you've all created a character in Adobe Fuse, which is a free program. I think you just need to have an Adobe ID. But you can kind of build your character, you can customize with all these sliders, add some clothing, adjust some textures, and then export. So let's start with the export. You go to File and Export. Export models OBJ. For us, we want to export in a new folder. We do not want to triangulate. We want to remove occluded polygons, which is any, for instance, like a lot of the torso mesh is underneath the shirt, so there's no reason to have those faces included. And then we want to set the character scale to 0.1 so it'll be reasonably sized when we get to Maya. Once we do that, we want to choose where to export it. I'm going to export mine. I created a new project folder in Maya called Character Animation. So I'm going to export this to the Assets folder. You can see I've already done that. So I'm going to hit cancel, but then you would hit save. Once you do that, you can quit Fuse and open up Maya. In Maya, to bring the character in, you go to File and Import, and we want to navigate to the asset. Whoops, I did not set my project. File, set project. So I've got character animation set. Okay, and then import. Navigate to the assets. Whoops, assets folder. Demo character. OBJ is what we want to import. And here it is. You can hit 6 on the number pad and the textures will pop up. These textures are not RenderMan textures, so if we want them to work in RenderMan, we need to do some relinking, but that will come at a later date. So now we are ready to actually add the skeleton. So I'm going to switch to my rigging menu set, and I'm going to save this real quick before I forget. So go back to my scenes folder, and this is going to be class rigging, save. Okay, so skeleton and HumanIK is what I want to open up. And the first thing I need to do is create a skeleton. So I'm going to click on that button. And right now the skeleton is enormous. So you can see actually if I didn't scale it down to 0.1 out of Fuse, it would work just fine, but I wanted to, so I did. So we want to adjust the character scale, and I'm just going to, let's see if we can, it's not going to give us an actual slider. So I'm just going to keep hitting, hit 0.1 a few times, maybe like 0.9, 0.99, nope, 0.9. There we go, until it's about the size of our character. That looks pretty good. Oops, go back to 1. We can even go into wireframe and just kind of make sure that it's, what I'm really looking at is making sure the arms are aligned. I can make adjustments to where the joints actually are here in a minute, but just to get the general scale right, I'm going to align that accordingly. You can also, in this HumanIK pane that opened up, where it says character, or actually right to the left of it, you can click on this blue icon and rename the character. So if you were to have multiple characters in a scene, this would become very beneficial. Because mine is very, very loosely inspired by Nathan Drake, decided it, whoops, not Nair, Nate. I can type, it becomes a lot easier. Nate. So that is renamed. My character scale is relatively close. I'm going to keep spine segments to 3, neck to 1, shoulder and clavicle to 1. I'm not going to worry about roll bones. Finger bones, you can have up to 6 fingers. Because we all have humanoid characters, we're going to stay with the default 5. Number of bones is good. We're not going to deal with toe bones because he's in shoes. So I think all of that is good. So now what we want to do is make adjustments to the position. Especially, you can see the hands are not perfectly lined up. So we are going to want to make those adjustments. So I'm going to open up quad view here because it's going to be a whole lot easier, and I'm going to keep all of my orthographic views in wireframe. Another thing that we actually should do first is I'm going to grab the whole skeleton, and in the layer editor I'm going to give it its own layer. Call it skeleton. Click save. I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to grab the mesh, all of the mesh. I'm going to give that its own layer.
Did you select all this? Yeah, for me, it just selects part of the skeleton.
Okay, so I've named
How do you select them?
layer, and I've named it. I've got my skeleton on the other layer, and I've named that. And oh, I seem to have accidentally deleted my skeleton. Let me undo a few times. There it is. Okay. So I'll name this made mesh. Click save. Okay. And one of the advantages of this is that now I can set this to a template layer, and it'll keep things nice and easy to see where everything is positioned. So what we need to do is we need to fine-tune the position of all of these joints in the mesh so that when we actually, what's called skinning, that the joints deform at the appropriate locations. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the head bone. You can see when I select it, it is automatically named because that's how HumanIK works. You can also go to definition and select things here, which is a nice little handy shortcut if you're having trouble selecting exactly what you want. But I'm going to start with the head, and in the side view I'm going to position it right about the base of the skull, right about where the spine would connect with the skull. So that's going to be roughly there or so. Okay. And then I'm going to work my way up the chain a little bit. I'm going to grab this neck bone, which is actually called, innate neck, and I want to position that. Now, when I try to position this, I'm going to run into a little bit of an issue, and you will too if you try to move it right now, is that the head bone is going with it. Because this is a hierarchical relationship, anything that the parent does, the child does too. But for this particular case, what we can do is prevent that and just move the individual joints that we want to move. And in this case, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to hold down the D key, much like we were changing a pivot point, and now I can move the neck bone, and I'm going to move it to the base of the neck. And this is good to have open in a few different views. The top view in this case is useless, but use all of the views available to you. You can even, we'll take that off of template so I get a better idea of where this is sitting. And I'm only going to move it in the Z and the Y direction. I do not want to move it in the X because this needs to stay in the center of the body. So make sure you keep that centered. If you do get off center, you can just turn on grid snapping and then snap it back to the center. All right, so once I have that, up next is going to be the shoulder. So I'm going to take this, and at this time I don't want to move just one of a joint. I do want to move the whole arm. And I'm only going to worry about his left side because using HumanIK, we've got this button right here, which is mirror matching. So if we adjust everything on one side, we can click that button and then the other side will just fall into place magically, which saves a decent amount of effort half the time. So I want to move the shoulder back so it's about the center of the shoulder. That's maybe a little bit too far. Again, you can look from all different angles. Keep it roughly in the center of the arm. That looks pretty good. I'll move it out just a touch. And then the elbow, I'm going to move to the elbow. And the wrist. Once I set the shoulder, I'm going to keep the elbow and the wrist vertically in line, so I'm only going to move it along the x-axis because that's how HumanIK likes it. It likes the arm to be defined as completely flat. Remember, you can hit F to frame up in the view whatever you have selected. So we'll keep this right about there. Looks good. Actually, let me go back to that elbow. I'm going to select that elbow joint, hold down D, and just move it a little bit back. Something like that. And now we need to position the fingers, which can get a little bit tricky, just because there's so many different lines going on in the scene. So what I have found is it's easiest for me to select a joint, kind of position it where I think it needs to be, and then I actually need to like orbit the view to get a better sense of where everything is. Because if I just like click on a joint and try to figure out if that's where I want it to be, it's tough to tell what the depth is, right? But if I start orbiting the view, then I get a better sense of where I am in 3D space. So that's the next step, is positioning all the knuckles. So this first one on the thumb is that very base joint. And actually that's the one that's even lowered down, because you're going to have one right at the tip of the finger, and then one at this joint, one at this joint, and then yeah, so that one's going to stay roughly there. I'll keep it there, that'll work. I'm going to grab this one, move it down, over, something like that. This one's going to go here. Again, this is kind of the tricky bit. Looks pretty good. And then this is going to be right at the tip of the thumb. There, I can move that down. And that looks good. Okay. So that's the thumb. Now I'm going to move on to the index finger. So this first joint is going to be the knuckle. And so figure out the best way to kind of visualize this is going to be. Looks like the knuckle's going to be roughly here. Go a little bit lower though. And if we kind of look how this lines up with the rest of the hand, see that we do need to move it over a little bit. Maybe out a little bit more too. Something like that. Okay. And then we can actually use some of the hands topology as clues. So if you see where these, we've got this ring of faces right here. Oops. All right, you see that ring of faces? That's that first joint on the finger. And then you've got another ring of faces at the second joint. And then this last bone will be right at the tip of the finger. All right. So I'm going to get those in place. Select that. Oh, let me get out of there. Select back to the skeleton. And if I do this in this order, moving down towards the end of the chain, I don't have to worry about holding D to manipulate individual joints. I can just kind of do one at a time.
How did you reveal those ring of faces?
So I'm gonna, I guess I'll finish doing the index finger on camera, and then I'll pause the recording and finish this up, so you don't have to just watch this for 15 minutes. So, focus up. That's pretty good. That looks good. I do want to rotate this too a little bit so that this joint stays oriented in the right direction. Then I'll grab this end and move that to the tip of the first finger. All looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to go through and do the rest of the hand here. Just about everything in place. I do want to make one note that the last bone, or the last joint in the foot, does not go at the toes, but rather at the kind of the ball of the foot. So right where bend right there is where that goes. So with that selected, roughly centered, I'm going to grab the leg and mirror that over, and so now I've got everything nicely aligned. Go back to my the transparent. You can see how everything is lined up. Everything assigned, I'm also going to take a moment to select everything, and actually I should name this instead of default one. This should be the eyes. I'm going to select all of the mesh objects, and I'm just going to group them into I don't know, call it mesh group, or maybe Nate mesh group. Just so I can easily select them all, which will be helpful here in a moment. Again, I want to remind you that having the outliner open will be beneficial so that you can select any bone, any joint at any point. Very easy, and oftentimes easier than trying to select it on the mesh when there's a lot of stuff cluttering up the screen. Okay, so we've got the bones all in place, and now what we need to do is actually skin the rig. So I need to actually make the skeleton drive and deform the mesh. Because right now, if I take this shoulder bone and I move it, you can see that the actual character doesn't do anything. They are not currently linked. So what we need to do is, now that I've grouped the whole body, I'm going to select the rig, right? So Nate reference, and then I'm going to shift select the group, the mesh group, so I have all of the different components selected. And I'm going to go to skin and bind skin, but I want to open the options, so I don't want to use the default. I've already actually no, I have not input the settings. So we've got a bunch of different options that kind of affect whatever calculations that Maya does to determine the best way to deform the mesh. I will link to the help page on D2L because it does go through all the different options and what they all mean and all the different settings and things that you can do. This whole page is just dedicated to this one options window. All right, there's a lot here, so I'm not going to get into all of it. This is going to be one of those times where just do as I say, mimic and copy, and we'll all be okay. So first, we want to bind to the joint hierarchy. That's good. The bind method, we're going to use closest in hierarchy. And what this is going to do is basically the binding process. Maya is going to look at all of the vertices in the mesh and all of the joints in the bones, and going to figure out, based on how close they are to each other, how much one given bone or joint is going to affect any given vertex. And so we've got a different, 4 different options of how it does that. Closest distance just does that. It looks exactly at, here's a vertex and here's a joint, how close are they? Okay, they're really close, they probably should be affecting each other, or the joint should probably be affecting that vertex. Closest in hierarchy is similar, but it won't, like, you might run into problems around the knees where you see the left pant leg is pretty close to the right knee joint, but those shouldn't be affecting each other, right? You can move one leg without pulling the cloth on the jeans on the other leg. And so the closest in hierarchy is going to limit that, and it's going to force, if something is going to be primarily affected by the left knee, it's going to either go up or down the hierarchy to look for secondary influences. It's not going to just jump across because this is the next closest joint. So that will help limit our options. Skinning method we're going to keep with classic linear. Normalized weights will be interactive. Weight distribution will be neighbors. Again, it's kind of doing a similar thing to what closest in hierarchy does. Max influences, I'm going to bring that down to 3. And then the drop-off rate, I'm going to bring that up to, I think I'll do like 8. Okay, once I have that all set, I'm going to click Bind Skin. Now, as soon as I do that, everything turns purple. And now I can select, first I'm going to set my mesh to be a reference. So I'm going to set my mesh to reference. And now as I rotate the skeleton, you can see that the mesh follows. Now, it's not following perfectly, which is where the last step of this process comes in, is that it's made assumptions, and they're not perfect assumptions, but I think it's a pretty good starting point. Let me go back to template so we can see this a little bit better. Kind of move things around, see all of that. Let's look at the head here. I'm going to select that. You can see there's some problems when he turns his head. Things get a little warped and distorted, right? Not ideal, but very fixable. So What we need to do now is a process called weight painting. And what that is the painting refers to the fact that it's a brush-based tool set. And then the weight refers to each vertex. The way that Maya associates vertices with joints is it assigns a value from 0 to 1 per vertex to joints. So if let's say we'll grab the head, and there's a vertex up here on the forehead. It's supposed to be completely controlled by this head bone, because there's no other bones up there. There's no other reason for any other part of the body to affect where that vertex on his forehead is going. So the weight of that should be 1. The weight of this vertex with regards to this bone should be 1. If it was 0, it would have no effect. If it has 1, it should have 100% effect. But you can also have values in between. You can have 0.5, so it would only have half of the influence. You could have 0.3, you could have 0.76, whatever. So what we need to do is make some adjustments. So in the skin menu, we've got paint skin weights. And actually what we want to do is click on the options so we open up that panel. And this is where you're all, once again, going to benefit from having 27-inch monitors, because you can see the screen space gets a little crowded here, especially if you also have an outliner open. But what we want to do and how this works is you want to select a mesh. So I need to not have that be reference. So you want to select a mesh. I'm going to select it in the outliner body, okay? And then we want to select a bone. So you can see we've got a hierarchy of all of the bones in this skeleton. What I want to do is scroll down to head, okay? And as soon as I select a bone with the mesh selected, so again, I've got the outliner open to the other screen so I can select, in this case, the body mesh. But I'm going to select a specific bone, which is the head. And all of this should be, let me take a step back. The way that this visually represents vertex weight is through color. And by default, it does it on a grayscale of black to white. So black, no effect, white, 100% effect. You can also turn on the gradient ramp, and then you can see it broken down into a gradient from blue to red. It's whichever you want. You can also change that to this kind of more heat style ramp, but I'm just going to keep it at the grayscale. So we've got in the paint skin weights tool, we've got a list of all of the different joints. You can see it's mostly hands, fingers, so I'm going to collapse the hands for now, just to simplify things, since I don't really need to see all of those bones at the moment. But it's also organized in a hierarchy, so you can see the spine bone, which is this one right here. And then you've got spine 1 moving up, spine 2, left shoulder, left arm, left forearm, left hand, and all the joints in there. You can see as I move down, it highlights what that bone is influencing. So the neck, and then the head. So we want the head to be completely affected by the head bone. So we've got a paint mode, a select mode, and a paint select mode. We want to be in paint. The paint operation, we'll keep it on replace. Weight type is skin weight. Opacity and value, we want to make sure are both up at 1. So the value is the value that you are painting. So if you paint with a value of 1, it turns it white, and it actually, because I've got a bone that has a transform on it, it's going to fall in line there. And I know I've got hair and eyes and mouth and teeth and everything going everywhere. I'll get to that here in a second. If I bring that down to 0, you can see everything turns black, and it just completely ignores the fact that I've rotated that bone. And then I can go anywhere in between, so I can go to a value of 5, and it'll have half the influence. So, real quick, I'm going to hide the rest. So eyes, eyelashes, I'm going to just right-click in the outliner. And I thought I could do it in there. Guess not. And hair. It's going to display and hide selection. It's also Control H, just the shortcut. I'm just going to get that out of the way for now and just focus on the body. Okay, so now I can go back here, select the body, select the head. I'm going to collapse all of this, so I don't need to worry about that right now. Just select the head, set the value up to 1, and select all. If you want to change the size of your brush, if we scroll down a little bit under stroke, we've got the radius right here. You can also, it's probably easier, if you hold down the B key and left click and drag, you can dynamically change the size of the brush to something a little bit more manageable. Okay, so now you can go through here and paint everything. There are mirroring options for weight painting too. So like when we do the left hand, we don't have to do the right hand as well. If you want to get back to the rest pose, you can go to HumanIK and select that bone. I believe I don't think it's clear. Nope, don't want to do that. Hold on, let me actually select the bone. So we can just go up to the channel box and set the rotate to 0. It's probably the easiest way. When we add the control rig, there's a kind of a reset pose button, which actually we can do right now. Probably make it easier. So if we go to the HumanIK, you've got this. We want to add the control rig, which is what you'll be using for like IK animation. Go to source and click control rig. It'll take a second, and then now we've got extra bones here. So now we've got like this IK bone that we can move around. You can see the arm goes with it. And we put it in one spot, and we say, okay, I'm good now. And now we can click this button right here, this little orange man, and it will reset that position. So again, I can select this bone here, and then I can reset it. Okay. So all you have to do is set the source to control rig, and now you've got those options. But back in weight painting, okay, I'm going to select my body mesh, and I'm going to select the head, and then I'm going to make sure I paint the whole head white. You may need to move around and make sure you get inside the ear, around the back of the ear. And if you're having trouble figuring out if it's gray or white, then maybe you want to use color ramp. And you can see, I don't know why that's so splotchy there. Let's click add. There we go. Change from replace to add, and now it's completely white. Okay, make sure you get 100% coverage. This does not paint through to the other side. So if I paint, like I've got right here, I've got the jaw completely white, but on the other side, it hasn't been affected. So you do have to paint both sides. And make sure you get behind the ears. And I'm going to leave it right about there, I think. Make sure we get all of that. Okay, now I can grab that bone and I can rotate it. You can see, for the most part, the head stays with it. Now, we've got some parts of the head that are inside, so obviously there's teeth and there's an inner mouth and possibly a tongue in there, which are not 100% affected. So that's what we need to adjust next. So I'm going to select these vertices, and I'm going to hit Control H to hide them. And then we've got all of these. Oops. Let me hide the skeleton for a second. Oh. Please stand by while Maya crashes on me. Okay. Okay, so I'm back to where I was before Maya crashed. So I'm going to hit Q to go into select, and right click, go to vertices. I'm going to double click on the head. I'm just going to select that whole kind of shell, and I'm going to hit Control H to hide it. And that leaves me with just the remaining mouth and tongue area. And now, I'm also going to just hide my skeleton. Oh, it doesn't actually hide. Well, that's not helpful. All right. So now, what I want to do is select. I'm just going to double click on a vertice for each part of the mouth. Whoops, I just did a thing I don't want to do. Okay, so I'm going to double click on a vertice on each part of the mouth so that I get everything selected. You can see some of the teeth in the front are not included, so I want to go through and just double click on each of those. And all of these I want to have complete, be completely influenced by that head bone, by the same bone, so it stays in the head where it belongs. So in order to do that, I'll go back to my weight painting, and you can see it's currently red, which places it about 50%. I'm going to set my value, my opacity to 1, and then you notice there's this button called Flood. And what that does is basically set it all to 1. It just automatically sets it to that value. So now that it's all there, because I had it all selected, now I can go back and display show last hidden. What you see is Command Shift H, and go back in object mode, and now it's all there. Now I can select that bone and I can rotate it, and it mostly goes with it. There's a little bit here that it looks like we need to adjust. Now, this is a super extreme angle, as you can tell. But we can go back here, and we can select the head. And just go ahead and paint on that and get that back in line where it belongs. And we go back to our rest pose position. And then we can do the same thing with the hair and the eyes and the eyelashes. I'm going to unhide them So that is selected in the outliner. Display, we can actually just go to show all. There we go. All right, and so with the hair selected, I can go into my white paint mode and just select the head and say flood, and select the eyes and say flood, and select the eyelashes and say flood. And now everything will follow my head. So that's the first part. The next, what we need to do is, you can see as he turns his head, it's a very kind of sudden fall off. Okay, you can see like it's 100% and then it's nothing. So we need to now adjust that. There's a little bit there that needs to be painted. So I'm going to select the head 100% and just paint on that and make sure we get that set. There's a couple little spots there that for whatever reason are not painting. I'm going to select. So if you go into select mode, you can actually select the individual vertices here, and you click and drag across them and set it to flood. Oh, and it's still not selecting. Oops. Go back to paint. Set it to flood. There it goes. Okay. Cool. So I think that gets rid of the majority of those. So let me reset that. Well, maybe I'll keep it a little bit turned so I can get a clue of what's going on here. And select my body. So now what I need to do is kind of smooth out these transitions because it's really sharp and sudden. And there is a tool just for that, and it's called Smooth. I'm going to select that, and maybe we're going to use this first profile, which is a little bit softer of fall off. And I'm just going to gradually, it's taking away from up there, so actually I think what I want to do is I'm going to go back to add here. I'll bring the value down a little bit. Bring the brush down a little bit. I'm just going to paint a little bit further down the neck. Maybe another couple of rows here. All the way around. You can see the advantage of doing this when you have a bone that has been transformed is that you can see how it's being affected real time. So once I have it there, now I can grab the smooth tool, and maybe I'll make the brush a little bit larger, and I can go in and even out that transition. And so this is one of those things, there's not really any specific set values as far as what things should be. It's just kind of not quite trial and error, but making adjustments, testing the rig, seeing how it deforms, and then going back and making further adjustments. So now I'm going to go and move down the chain a little bit to the neck. You can see I want to increase this. I'm going to go to add, and maybe I'll make my brush a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to add right across the center here. Now, as you're adding different values, there's this normalize weights option that's set to interactive. And what that does is make sure that no vertex can have a combined weight of greater than 1. So if you have a vertex that's being completely affected by the head, So that's set to a value of 1, and then you also painted a little bit for the neck. It's going to, Maya's going to automatically kind of average those together so that the values add up to 1 and don't go greater than 1. If you go greater than 1, then you can have some trouble with deformation and things kind of staying even. So that's what that's doing in the background. So I'm going to smooth this out a little bit now. Again, we don't want any like corners to pop up when he turns his head. That would be a weird thing. Just gonna kind of go around here. All right, so that neck is looking a little bit better. I think we need a little bit more. Maybe select that bone. Yeah.
I'm still having trouble. Won't let me like.
Okay, so neck is looking pretty okay. Let's jump to the shoulder here. I'm gonna reset that. We'll jump to the shoulder, and then so as we bring the shoulder up, we can see that that's clearly not great. So I'm going to grab this bone right here, which is the spine 2 bone. And in this case, there's not really any mesh underneath that we need to worry about. So let me grab the tops mesh, okay, and go back to weight paint. And so spine 2. Let's see, again, it's not as strong as I would like it. So go back to my add brush, and maybe we'll make that a little bit larger. And you can see as I paint around here, that kind of falls back into line. Again, you want to try to keep it even and smooth. So do some painting and then go back and grab the smooth brush to keep things, make that a little bit larger. All right, you're usually not going to have an immediate transition from black to white. There's usually going to be some gradients in between. And I'll keep things from looking too spiky and pokey. Let's see this. Oops. This clavicle needs to. Oops. Go back here. Select the top. And let's select. This bone, the shoulder, gonna add all right. That looks good-ish. Maybe if I want to remove some of the underneath here, under the arm, then I'll go to replace and bring my value down. Paint that in. Spine. The arm. Maybe I'll remove some of that here too. that all the way to 0. There we go. Okay, and that's feeling better. And maybe that needs to adjust a little bit more. But yeah, this is kind of the process. I'm not going to record myself going through and weight painting this entire character. But I want to give you an idea of the tools and kind of what you need to do to get things looking right. So once you do one side, let's say I've got this exactly where I want it, then you want to go to, where is it? Give me just a second. Pose so that everything is symmetrical. Then I'm going to grab mesh and the vertices, and I'm going to go to skin and mirror skin weights. I'm going to go positive to negative, click mirror. I'm going to do the same thing for the body, and skin and mirror skin weights. And now, if all went according to plan, back in object mode here. It did not. Perfect. All right. Okay, I just made it too complicated. All you have to do is select the skin and go to mirror skin weights. You don't have to select the individual vertices. Just select the skin. So, and by skin I mean just whatever the mesh object is. So you can select the shirt, mirror skin weights, and now as one goes up, so too does the other. And everything's great. Mention one other thing, being that this is a character that is actually divided into separate meshes, and they don't come, it's not a continuous mesh. You want to make sure that the joints, when they deform, that you're not seeing gaps in the mesh. So one thing that can be helpful is just to make sure that the edges between the two have the same values. So in this case, the forearm, I want that all to be 1. Right, because the elbow and the forearm, whenever the elbow bends, this whole piece is going to go with it. And I'll leave a little bit around the wrist. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Maybe we'll bring that down a little bit. Okay. And now I've got the top hidden, so I'm going to show that. All right. Now, if I'm not careful, when I rotate this, you can either get gaps and see the in between, or you'll see the poking through. So, I want to make sure that then this part of the top has the same weights. So, it may even also be helpful to hide the body, and then come here to the tops, select that bone, and make sure that that is painted that same weight all the way around. Okay. And with the elbow, this is probably all going to be at least right up to the joint, it'll all be part of that. Especially kind of the inside crease joint of the elbow is going to be a little bit sharper than the outside. So maybe I'll smooth out the outside of the elbow a little bit. Okay. Rotate that, and now we don't have, there's a little smidge of intersection which I need to fix, but we have a whole lot less, and that feels certainly more natural than it did before. Not completely done weight painting, but I just wanted to wrap the video up. Remember that once you do weight paints on one side, you can go up to skin and mirror skin weights, and it will copy over to the other side. By default, it goes from character left to character right, or positive X to negative X, but you can change those if you happen to go the other way. Yeah, so you can see, make sure that as you're doing this, you're testing all different poses. You can see, as I bring the foot up, I accidentally grabbed a vertex over here, so I need to select the pants, go back into weight paint, figure out, looks like it was the left foot bone that I grabbed that. Now I will go to replace, set the value to 0, and make sure I paint those 0, if I can get it to paint. At this point, it might be easier to reset the pose so it's not so distorted. Then I can go back into weight paint. Yep, I can see right there I grabbed it. Set that back to 0. Okay, good. I go back and test that again, make sure that it's, oh, nope, still got it. So I gotta go back and fix that. But again, that's why you need to, don't just weight paint in the rest pose and assume that's great. Make sure you're going back and testing all the joints and all the different ways that they're gonna bend, and make sure it looks good from all angles. And then from there, you can go in and do your 3 poses for homework next week. Again, one, to get comfortable posing a character and making it feel natural, and also to test and make sure that the weight painting is done in a sufficient way. Don't forget that the Maya help is a, not this, this is something else. The Maya Autodesk Knowledge Network Learn User Guide, whatever, is packed full of information as far as how to use all the different tools, and also steps to take to mirror skin weights and all the different things that you may need to do. So use it as a resource. I'll post some links on D2L for your reference as well, and I will see you next week.